So my name is Darin Wold, and you can't hear me. Let's do this. All right, so my name is Darin Wold, and I got started in teaching creation, and then that stepped into the Genesis 6 scenario really quick with my creation studies. And that was back about 2015-16 when that began. And I kept seeing all kinds of evidence all throughout the Bible that this Genesis 6 thing was a big deal. And there was something that kept appearing and kept appearing. When it did, it caused a lot of trouble and a lot of problems. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to walk through this connection of these fallen angels and what's happening now, the Nephilim, the alien. It's a total lie from the pit of hell, but understanding how they got to it and the way they got there, I think helps us to have a better view of what it is we're seeing. So real quick, if you haven't seen the first series that we did about a month ago, I'm just going to quickly walk you through that Genesis 6, 1 through 4. It's the 200 fallen angels that came down to Mount Hermon, and they made a pact, and they decided, we are going to mix our seed with human women. And that's what it says right there in Genesis 6, if you go read that. And then it talks about, and the giants were on the earth in those days, and the Nephilim, the Gibberim, the mighty men of old. And we have evidence then, all throughout the rest of the scriptures. You know, the most famous one, obviously, is Goliath fighting David. But later on in Kings and Chronicles, we have descriptions of David's mighty men fighting other giants and descriptions of how big these guys were. They had, in many cases, 6 fingers and 6 toes on each hand, on each foot. We have descriptions of that all across the planet, though. It's not just in what you call the Levant, the area around Israel. We actually have descriptions here in the United States, in the Americas, that the American Indians would tell you about the original race of giants that lived here before they came here. And the giants were so big and strong they could actually scoop a buffalo up with one arm, tear a leg off, and eat it on the run. These were huge men. They also tell you very specifically they were evil. They were cannibalistic. They were known to attack the indigenous people. They would grab their braves and they would pluck the head off and drink the blood. They were horrifying, evil creatures. And it's also after years and years of continually hybridizing and mating with other peoples that they got smaller slowly over time, and they were no longer these huge monsters that were 15 feet tall or 12 feet tall. They got to be 7, 8 feet tall. Still very cannibalistic, very evil, and that's why you've all heard of the myth of how a white man in Hollywood had nothing to do with greeting how a white man. That's Hollywood. What it did do, and they'll tell you this, is if you put your hand up and you're meeting someone, you're proving you have 5 fingers. You can be trusted. Because if you pull up a 6th digit, they're going to kill you on sight. And that was what that greeting was. So we have this evidence, and it runs all throughout the Americas. And the evidence comes from what you call the diaspora, when the children of Israel left Jerusalem, didn't leave like they wanted to. They were actually taken into captivity into Babylon. When that happened, there was at that time probably, I would say just a few that were left, and not very many. But even to this day, you can still go over and see some of those giant homes that are still there. We talked about that too last time. But when Moses came up with the children of Israel to take the land, they had to chase the giants out. They had to fight them. That's why the bands of the Amalekites, the Amorites, they killed every man, woman, and child. They were hybrids. They weren't supposed to be there. And they fled in front of them. They didn't, you imagine if you're a 12-footer and a 6-foot guy comes up and kills you, you're like, what? How did that happen? The rest of the 12-footers are going to run and flee because they can't understand what's the power of God inhabiting those men and enabling those Israelite warriors to be able to kill these giants. So then they fled, and when they fled across the Mediterranean. We have evidences all across the islands of Malta, Sardinia, all through the Mediterranean, and then North Africa, even parts of Gibraltar, Spain, going up into the British Isles, across the Pacific or the Atlantic Ocean into North America, Central America, and South America. And we have what I would call Nephilim settlements, places where they actually settled. And the bones were found all throughout the Americas. We found these huge mounds, the mound builders they called them. And every time you dig into them, because you want to level the field, because the farmer wants to plant on flat land, not a big hill, as they dug in, they would find these skeletons anywhere from 8 to 15 feet tall. And these are huge beings. And they knew about it. It was common. You'd find them in newspapers all the time. Almost every major newspaper back in the late 1700s, early 1800s had stories about the giant skeletons and skulls that were being dug out of the mounds all across the United States. It's been suppressed since then, continually. And in fact, even to the point that you can kind of point fingers at who's doing it, one being the Smithsonian specifically. And even today, if you call them up and try, hey, where are the giant bones? They're going to give you a line, because they can't have the truth being known, because remember, they support millions of years. They support an evolutionary timetable. They also support this isolation theory, that the ancient cultures and civilizations were isolated. They did not travel back and forth across these big oceans and actually visit other places. They didn't do that. See, that's their belief. And if you start messing up with their belief, oh my, you're in big trouble. So anyway, that's what we went through last time. We got to the point where I wanted to present a video to you guys on some of the evidences about the skeletons we've dug up. So, Isaac, if you'll cue the video.
Every Friday on the Ancient Alien series, which has been running for about 10 years, we are told ancient astronauts visited Earth and are responsible for the creation of man. In other words, the God of the Bible really didn't create us. E.T. did. They also claim that many of these ancient sites that we've discussed in our first 3 films of the series were once again attributed to E.T.'s intervention. However, there is another paradigm that speaks of a supernatural world, one that is based on the biblical narrative. And it is that paradigm that our series embraces and puts forth. This film is about our 6-year quest to nail down the possible origins of the mysterious elongated skulls that are found in Peru. You'll hear from archaeologists, anthropologists, surgeons, medical doctors, and a chiropractor who will state that these enigmatic skulls are not the result of cranial deformation, or what is more commonly referred to as cradle headboarding, but are in fact genetic anomalies. Could these skulls be the remnant of one of the tribes of the Nephilim that we read about in our Bibles? The Anakim were listed as one of these tribes, and Anakim translates long neck. Is there a hidden history that has been deliberately obfuscated from the people of the world? Is there a managed agenda to bolster a particular narrative? We think so. And that's why we made this film, to expose the deception of the prince of the power of the air. Join us and examine the evidence for yourself.
I came to the conclusion that this cannot be a human being, it has to be something else.
We don't have that in our features.
You can't push that back in anatomy. You can't do any kind of head manipulation to do that. And both of these guys have it.
This could be a result of a genetic anomaly or genetic manipulation.
So this has to be genetic.
This is almost like a whole new mutation line. Yes, it's definitely a genetic anomaly.
It is about a third, 30% larger.
And that's why it has to be genetic.
Right.
It has to be a genetic difference.
You cannot create this with pressures.
I think we're looking at a whole different species.
Would this particular entity have more brain power than a normal human being?
And this you cannot make by more creating the skull.
This is definitely something that is genetic.
Another genetic anomaly.
An ancient prophetic text found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, known as the Book of Enoch, states that a group of watcher angels, 200 in number, descended in the days of Jared on Mount Hermon.
Knowing full well the penalty they would receive for what they were about to do, they made what was essentially a suicide pact and did the unthinkable. They took human wives and had children by them.
This unholy union created a hybrid being, part angel, part human, known as the Nephilim. These watcher angels and their unholy offspring populated the earth. The watcher angels also sinned against the animal kingdom, created centaurs, minotaurs, and other abominations known as chimeras. The Nephilim began to eat and drink the flesh and blood of humans, and at this point, the Ancient of Days, the God of the Bible, intervened and flooded the earth. Everything that had breath perished in this great flood, except for 8 people and the animals that they had put on the ark they had been instructed to make. However, these ancient texts tell us that there was another incursion of these watcher angels after the flood, and the hybrid being known as the Nephilim were once again seen on the earth. For it is written that the Nephilim were on the earth and also afterwards, when the angels took wives and had children by them.
The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, who wrote in the 1st century AD, said this:
There were, till then, left the race of giants, who had bodies so large and countenances so entirely different from other men, that they were surprising to the sight and terrible to the hearing. The bones of these men are still shown to this very day, unlike to any credible relations of other men. First Nation people in the Americas tell us that a race of red-haired, 6-fingered giants who were cannibalistic that inhabited the land and would raid their villages, ripping the heads of the braves and drinking their blood.
Large skeletons were exhumed in the Americas, which seemed to point to the validity of the Native American oral tradition. Elongated skulls are found all over the earth. While they are not giants, they may be the vestiges of one of the Nephilim tribes known as the Anakim, which translates as long necks. Join us as we delve into the mysterious, elongated skulls of Peru.
In 2013, I was watching a YouTube video which showed researcher Brian Forrester in the Paracas History Museum in Paracas, Peru. Forrester was taking elongated skulls out of a display case and holding them up to a camera as he pointed out what appeared to be anomalies in the skulls. This video led to my hypothesis that the elongated skulls may have been the remnants of the biblical Nephilim. The hypothesis was based on the historical fact that roughly 3,500 years ago, when Joshua and Caleb pressed the conquest of Canaan in the Levant, or the Middle East, there were Nephilim tribes dwelling in the land. These tribes were known as the Rephaim, the Zamzumim, the Anakim, and of course the Nephilim. I wondered whether some of these tribes may have fled the armies of Joshua and perhaps found their way to Peru. I contacted Forrester and he informed me that I was welcome to come down to Paracas and see the skulls for myself. So in 2013, we mounted the first expedition to the Paracas Museum. Richard Shaw filmed the adventure, which became the basis of the award-winning film Watcher 6, The Secret Cosmic War. Joe Taylor from the Mount Blanco Museum was part of the original team. Joe created the one-to-one molds of the Paracas skulls that you will see throughout this film. Judd Burton was our team's first archaeologist. Ron Moorhead was an adventurer who has authored 2 books and was also part of our team. In 2014, we mounted another expedition with archaeologist Aaron Judkins. Aaron assisted Joe Taylor on unwrapping what turned out to be a 1,935-year-old mummy skull with Senior Juan Navarro hiding in the museum. This was unprecedented and offered our team an opportunity to collect fresh DNA material. I had started a lengthy permit process to take out samples from the country legally to do DNA testing. The process was slow-going and, in fact, had grinded to a complete stop. Frustrated, I posted a help wanted ad on my blog and received several emails from archaeologists who stated they would be able to help with the permit process. Enter Mando Gonzalez, who joined our team and created the complex paperwork necessary to obtain the legal permits from the Minister of Culture. Through a connection from Brian Forrester, Mando was able to contact Ruben Garcia Soto, who was an archaeologist working at the Ica Museum. At this point, Mando enlisted Patricia Argalas, an archaeologist from Spain. Mando and Patricia created 3 hypotheses that the team wanted to test. Our first hypothesis was this: are the Paracas people indigenous to Peru? In other words, how does the DNA of the Paracas skull compare with other known tribes, such as the Inca or the Wari? Are they unique or similar? Mando and I wanted to see if the elongation was due to genetic anomalies or the result from cranial deformation, or what is more commonly known as cradle headboarding. After the formal request from Mando and Patricia was submitted to the Ministry of Culture in Peru, a year passed by with seemingly no progress. Mando and I were frustrated as the team had jumped through all of the hoops, but seemingly to no avail. Then, out of nowhere, I received an email from Peruvian archaeologist Ruben Garcia Soto, who had stated that now we had permission to come and collect the samples, but we had a narrow window of time to do so. Our team had only 1 month to plan the trip, book the airfare, hotels, and transportation. Our team consisted of myself, Richard Shaw, Mando Gonzalez, and Chase Klodsky, who was hired to bag and tag the DNA samples. Our team flew to Peru and had access to 18 skulls from which to extract the DNA from. Bone, hair, and teeth were taken and put in paper envelopes for processing. Mando wanted to do a level of redundancy in the testing, so if the bone would not sequence in the DNA lab, perhaps a tooth or hair would. The team had a total of 18 skulls and took 58 samples. Of the 18, 9 were from the Ica Museum. The other 9 were from Senior Juan Navarro's Paracas History Museum, as well as private collections in the United States. This was done legally with the proper permits from the Ministry of Culture. Mando and I flew back to Peru to collect the samples. I carried the letters of transit stamped with the official seal, as well as a letter from the Ministry of Culture, and flew back to the United States with the DNA samples. I sent the samples to the Paleo DNA lab in Canada, and the results were incredible and bolstered our team's hypothesis that these mysterious, elongated people may have come from somewhere in Europe or the Middle East. The DNA from the Ica Museum, as well as the Paracas History Museum, also pointed to a European and Middle Eastern origin. This film is the aftermath of 6 years of research and hundreds of thousands of dollars. It will set the record straight as to how the DNA was extracted, processed, and interpreted. Moreover, it will show that these skulls are not the result of cradle headboarding, or what is more commonly known as cranial deformation, but are in fact genetic. Finally, we will present the overwhelming evidence that the enigmatic Paracas people did not originate in Peru, but perhaps in the Middle East, and this may in fact rewrite history as we know it.
Thanks, Ed. So you can see there that that's DNA evidence showing the existence of the Nephilim on the earth, and that this whole idea of isolationism that has been taught all over the United States for literally for over 100 years now is a complete fabrication. And they were traveling all over the planet back then. This isn't anything new that we travel now. They were doing it back then. We're just doing it in different ways. But at the same time that was going on, the other thing that we talked about in that last series was that when the angels came down to mix their DNA, they also shared advanced knowledge, secrets of heaven, if you will. And certain angels were teaching different concepts to the humankind that they got involved in. And imagine men being taught how to make weapons out of metal, the art of warfare. Women being taught how, one angel taught how to beautify the eyelids and to let women see behind them, in other words, a mirror, and the art of seduction. Another angel taught the art of killing the unborn in the womb. These types of things are very old. You know, you talk about abortion, a modern issue. No, this has been going on from way before the flood. So what these guys were doing was very evil. And I think it was, you know, when we talked about the earlier, the war that was going on, it was a seed war between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And the whole idea that Lucifer had was, if I can destroy the seed of the woman, then I'll never get destroyed myself, because that was that prediction in Genesis 3:15, that the seed of the one day the seed of the woman would crush the seed of the serpent. So he's been going after that seed of the woman ever since. There was an initial incursion that we think happened probably by another angel called Azazel before the 200 Watchers, kind of as a test run. Will it work? What's going to happen? And then shortly after that, then came the 200 Watchers. And to give you an idea of the timeline, that's the reason I have this up here. If you're looking at how long these guys were on the planet doing this, this is our 6,000-year timeline, biblical timeline, okay? And from creation, here's the days of Jared. Probably somewhere between 400 and 500 years after creation, we have the 200 fallen angels coming down. And between this timeline right here and Noah's flood is over 1,000 years. Probably something like 1,200 to 1,300 years that this hybridization was going on the planet. And they're mixing their seed. And then within the book of Enoch, we find out it wasn't just that they were mixing their seed with women. They actually talk about them mixing their seed with 200 different kinds of animals, plants, birds, fish, creating all kinds of abominations, which actually is where we probably get a lot of the creatures from our mythology. We talk about centaurs, minotaurs, you know, all these different creatures that you think, well, who came up with these ideas? Well, I would posit to you that a lot of this myth is actually based on truth that's even older than the myth. And it's remembrances of these things, and they make stories about them, and then that's where we get these incredible tales that we get from guys like C.S. Lewis, you know, the Chronicles of Narnia, and all these minotaurs, these centaurs, all these beings that are in those movies that are like, that's fantastic. Yeah, it's probably pointing back to an earlier time when they were actually on the earth. And if it got so hybridized to the point that there's no longer a seed of the woman, then he wins. And that was his goal. But you'll read in Genesis 5 that Noah was a righteous man and he was perfect in his generations. That doesn't mean he was a perfect man, but his genealogy, his genes. In other words, he was still part of a perfect creation of God, and no hybrids had gotten involved in his line, his lineage. And that meant he was one that God could continue the world with. And same with his wife, same with his 3 sons and their wives. And they were all brought then on the ark. And then I believe God brought the animals to the ark by making the ones that are still non-hybrid show up. Okay? And I think there are lots of hybrids we dig up all the time. And I think some of them are even in our records of what we would call dinosaurs. There are certain dinosaurs that you wonder, that looks like, if I were a military guy, that would be a natural tank. You know, Triceratops, right? That thing into battle, right? That'll plow guys over, even giant guys, right? So I think there were hybrids going on like crazy at that time. Well, the flood comes, wipes everybody out, and we get to start over. Well, there's an interesting thing in the book of Enoch. Jay had asked a question. I want to get to that, and that's why I brought this up. When these giants, the Nephilim, when they died, how did they die? They drowned, right? And then when they drowned, it's very interesting. In the book of Enoch, there's a section where it talks about Enoch coming in front of some of these watcher angels that had come down and done the deed, and then they could no longer go back to heaven. They no longer had access. That had been cut off. And now they're afraid, because think about this. Uh-oh, we're in trouble. And they can't even talk to God anymore. And so they actually go to Enoch because they know he's a man who walks with God. Just like the Bible says, Enoch walked with God for 365 years, and then he wasn't. God took him. Well, they come to him and they say, listen, would you bring a petition before the Lord? He's not listening to us. Would you ask him to forgive us for the sins that we've committed? And so Enoch is funny. He actually says, sure, I'll do this. And he then writes how he in a dream, he's coming before the Lord in his own vision, his own dream, and he doesn't even get to speak. And the Lord says, I know what you're going to ask. And the answer is no, I will not forgive them, for they knew better. They watched me create the world. They knew that this was wrong. And those angels are going to watch their sons die. They're going to watch all these creatures they've created perish. And because they are a mixture of angel and human, there is no place for them in heaven or in hell. They will be condemned to be spirits roaming the earth. And that's where we get what you and I would commonly call demons. And this is interesting then. And the reason I bring this forth is when Jesus in the New Testament comes across the man that's demon possessed, right? And he says, who are you? We are many, we are legion. You remember this conversation. You know, he says, are you come before our time to torment us? What are you? And he's, you know, he knows who it is. They know who he is. They recognize him as the Son of God. And they're fearful that their time is already up, and they know their time can't be up yet. And so then they ask, would you send us into the pigs? And what does he do? He sends them into the swine. This is really interesting because thinking, you know, he sends them into the swine, and then what is it the pigs do? They run into the sea. I think the Lord told and made those pigs run into the sea. Think about this. If you died drowning, do you think you'll have a good feeling about water? Or would that be a terrifying thing? That would be the worst thing. In fact, there's several other passages in the Bible, you probably remember these, where it says when an evil spirit is sent out of a person, a demon, and it wanders in a dry place in a desert, right? Why a dry place? Well, because it doesn't want to go anywhere near water. It wants to be as far away from water as it can. That's how it perished. That's how it died. So I believe, you know, when you're looking at the creation story, we have God creating man, he created angels, and he created animals. There's no place where he ever talks about creating demons. And I think many people have falsely thought, well, the fallen angels, they're demons. No, a fallen angel is smart. He's articulate. He's conniving. He's everything you can imagine that a good angel would be, just evil, right? He's working now for Lucifer or for his own ends. A demon, on the other hand, if you notice all these interactions with demons in the Bible, they are voracious. They have an appetite for the lusts of the flesh that they can no longer participate in. But they did as a giant. As a Nephilim, they were able to eat. They were able to have sex. They were able to go out and do all the things they wanted and loved to do. They can't anymore. They have no more corporeal body. All they are is a spirit. And all their desires and passions are wrapped up in getting a body of some sorts to fulfill these lusts of the flesh. I think that is a demon. And that's where we get that description. So when we're looking at these things that are smart, they're conniving and have a plan, we're not talking about demons. We're most likely talking about either fallen angels or the beings that they are now creating, which again I would say are Nephilim again. They're just not like they were before the flood. A couple things. Before the flood, when we teach the creation series, we talk about the atmosphere and how it was a perfect atmosphere. It was twice the atmosphere we have right now, twice the pressure. It had 1.5 times more oxygen, and it had, oh man, several thousand times more carbon dioxide. You know, that made a perfect atmosphere for growth, for living in, and then it had a protective canopy of either water vapor or ice. I think I lean toward the ice theory. It just means everything grew fast, grew huge, grew perfect, and it didn't decay and die like we do now with all the rays, the cosmic rays, solar rays, everything hitting us, UV light that's aging our bodies and making us get old. So before the flood, these giants were huge. The Nephilim, they were very big. You notice after the flood, the descriptions are much smaller. They're not near what the size of the pre-flood giants are. And I think that's part of the atmosphere that's going on. I also think God engineered something DNA-wise so that the same thing they did before isn't going to quite work like it did before. And now they're doing something different. And I think what they're doing now is more along what we're seeing in our own science right now. If you guys have heard of CRISPR technology, CRISPR technology is something developed in 2012, and we had a lady that came up with this crazy idea. It's called CRISPR-Cas9, and what it does is it allows you to manipulate DNA in plants, animals, human beings, to the point that one of the common things, if you go on Amazon right now, you can look up a CRISPR-Cas9 kit. Now they range from like $150 to $250, and you have a little puppy dog at home, and you get the kit, you go home, you take DNA from your puppy, you send it back in the lab, and then with an instruction, I would like you to add this DNA strand from this jellyfish that glows in the dark in the ocean to my dog's DNA. So they use the CRISPR-Cas9 kit, they splice and cut out this piece of DNA, they put in the glow-in-the-dark piece, they put it all back together, they send it to you, you inject this in your puppy, and in with a couple days, your puppy's fur glows in the dark. This is right now, in fact, it's been happening for almost a decade. We know of people who have been using this on themselves, all right? Multiple weightlifters have been caught doing this to themselves, increasing their muscle mass. Just crazy stuff going on. So this is what's going on right now. And I think right after the flood, there was something very similar to this. There's a really obscure verse. And I wanted to read it. In fact, Jay is probably dying now because he's going to say, I've read that before. That's really weird. It's Genesis 36:24. And I remember the first time I read it, I was like, okay, Lord, this is a weird one. I don't even know where to go with this. But what it is, I'll give you the background. This is one of the genealogies of Esau. And it's talking about all the different lineage running in Esau. And at the time, this is right when Jacob is meeting Esau again, after he's gone to Laban and got his wives, and they've had children, and lots of cattle, lots of sheep, and he's on his way back to his home because he knows he doesn't want to be there with Laban anymore. Well, here's this verse, and all of a sudden you read this verse, and it's in a genealogy list, but I'll read you the verse. You'll have to hear this. And these are the children of Zibeon, both Asia and Anah. This was that Anah that found the mules in the wilderness, as he fed the asses of Zibeon, his father. What the heck is that? I remember the first time I read that, I was like, this is just really weird. Why would you even say that? Well, it was about 2 weeks ago.
Just a second. Mine says the water in the wilderness as he pastured the donkeys of his father Zibeon.
Mm-hmm.
What did yours say?
Asses. Donkeys, asses, same thing, right?
Oh,
right?
Okay, I thought you said water, mules.
Mules, yes. See, it said, this was the Anah that found the mules in the wilderness as he fed the asses of Zibeon, his father. That's the King James, okay? Here, it's Genesis 36:24. Very weird, obscure verse, but let me show you what I found out about 2 weeks ago. So 2 weeks ago, I was doing a Bible study online with Dr. Ken Johnson, and he was showing how in the original Hebrew, the word mule that's our word. We put mule in. What is a mule? Thank you. It's a hybrid between a horse and a donkey. We call it a mule, right? The original Hebrew word was a word for a hybrid. But at the time that the translation took place into English, the only hybrid known to the people of the time that was common was a mule, horse and donkey. So that's why the English used that word, mule. The actual word should be hybrid. And when you go a little deeper into some of the Hebrew texts that describe this meeting of Ana, oh boy, it described what you're looking at. These hybrids, they were about 4.5 feet tall. They had legs like a man, but from their waist up, they were more like a bear or a gorilla. They were all hairy. And then they had this massive tail that started at the back of their neck, right between their shoulder blades, and went all the way to the ground, almost 8 feet long. And as this one came up, it hit Ana in the face with the tail, knocked him completely on the ground, almost killed him. And then they all jumped on those donkeys and they rode them away. These were hybrids. Someone was hybridizing to create creatures that weren't supposed to be here, probably trying to get to the point of being able to make a Nephilim and do other things, which is what the children of Israel had found when they got there, right? This is in advance of the children of Israel showing up on the Levant, and that's where that verse is placed in there. And you're all of a sudden realizing, oh my, somebody had a DNA lab going in the Levant, or in that area at that time. Also, some pretty interesting things in our recent discoveries. If you guys heard of Göbekli Tepe, Göbekli Tepe was a discovery made, I think it was in 95, and it's in Turkey. And as they dug down, what they're seeing makes no sense and it doesn't match anything anybody's ever dug up. But what it does look like to me, if I had to say somebody was messing with DNA and what maybe even could be called an ancient DNA genetic lab, that's what I think they found. But they always want to say, oh, it's some religious temple worshiping animals. But the strange thing is there's a lot of animal pictures, but there are some hybrid pictures carved into some of the stones too that make no sense. If you're talking about just animals and you're going to compare all the other animals, why would you have those hybrid pictures put in there? Now, anyway, so I'll leave that to you to think about. But if they're doing that at that point, then we're getting to these incursions of the actual Nephilim. There's also some technology going on that is, as we get to where we are now with this UFO phenomenon that we're dealing with, it's actually really old. We think the UFO phenomenon is something new. Does that sound like what you would commonly think of? It's like in the last 100 years, right? I got one for you. A lot of people haven't heard of this. I had to write it down to make sure that I had the dates correct. But there was a very interesting incursion that took place in Germany in 1561, Nuremberg. It was April 1561, and that day, the people of Nuremberg, they got to witness these huge shapes in the sky. So they described them as pyramids, as spheres, as cylinders, shooting rays of light at each other, running into each other, bursting into flames, falling to the ground, causing everything they touched to burn and catch on fire. This happened all night and all day, and a gentleman, actually an artist in Nuremberg, went out and painted it. And there's a painting of it. You can look it up today. It's really weird. It looks like a bunch of geometric shapes up in the sky over a city background. 10 years later, we have almost the same thing occur in, or not quite 10 years, 5 years later, in 1566 in Basel, Switzerland. And this one has even some crazier stuff happening with even more of these spheres crashing into each other, falling to the ground, bursting in flames, explosions. People not even knowing how to describe this because it's so far beyond their paradigm of what could be, right? When you're seeing what you and I would call, well, those are UFOs having a battle in the sky. Well, okay, if those are UFOs, then who's in them? That's a good question. Well, I would posit to you, I'm pretty sure it's not demons, because they got to have a physical body, and once they do, it seems like all they do is want to just experience the lust of the flesh. I don't think they can get control of themselves long enough to even think coherently. But I wouldn't put it past a fallen angel. And how many angels do we know from the Bible have fallen with Lucifer?
guess a third.
A third, that's what we're told, right? We don't know the total number, but we know that it's more than 10,000 times 10,000. So it's more than 100 million. So if it's more than 100 million, then we know that he has more than 33 million fallen angels. That's a lot of bad guys, right? And if they are knowing secrets of heaven, right, supposedly, it's interesting. In the book of Enoch, one of the things that comes of this whole secrets of heaven being taught, the Lord at one point is speaking to Enoch to tell those watcher angels, and those secrets that you thought you knew, those were the worthless ones. Those were the ones that were complete garbage, didn't matter at all. So there are probably some things that they did know that even to us today are going to seem like supernatural, magic, alien, right? You know, I brought something up here today because my grandkids love this silly thing. It's a pen that just stands suspended in air. Now, David, how is this doing it? You know.
See, probably magnetic.
Yep, it's a magnet, right? But to little kids, they think this is magic, right? Okay? Any advanced form of technology without exposure to the science behind it comes across to a civilization as magic or supernatural abilities. So what we're seeing with this UFO phenomenon is not alien technology, it's not magic, but it is physics. But it's physics. See, we think as mankind, we know everything. No, we don't. Not even close. This is physics that we don't understand because, wait a minute, do we really know what gravity is? No. We don't even know what light is. And what if you have a ship that is electrogravitically controlled and it creates its own gravity field? Now this ship, propelling itself by its own gravity field, is no longer being exposed and manipulated by Earth's gravity because it has its own gravity field. And it can make a 90-degree turn at 2,000 miles an hour without the occupants feeling it because they're under the control of the ship's gravity.
Counteract inertia.
Exactly. The inertia no longer is under effect because the gravity is in the ship itself. There's multiple ancient texts that speak of these ships. The Indian ones are the best, they're the easiest to understand. In their ancient Veda texts that are pre-flood, they speak of these flying ships called the Vimanas that could take flight, go up in the air, they could travel all over, they could even go into orbit, into space. They talk about travel to other planets, to the moon. They even talk about the weapon systems used on these ships. They say they were so powerful that they would exude the power of the sun in a small projectile, that when it hit the target, the city, an umbrella cloud of dust and smoke would occur. That sounds like a weapon that we know. In fact, I think I'd call it a nuke, don't you? Because they also described how it takes 9 months for the air to clear before you can go there, or you will die. And you can never go back and eat the food there or drink the water there. And people involved in whatever happens there, they are burned horribly, disfigured, and they will die soon. Even if they live through the blast, they will still die. This is all an ancient text from India from over 5,000 years ago. That's one of the things we teach in the creation series. I believe there was an ancient thermonuclear war that took place on the planet pre-flood, before the flood of Noah. And what it was is when the Lord told Enoch to tell, hey, you're going to watch those sons die. He actually then turned to one of the angels and said, I want you to go down and turn the Nephilim, the giants, on each other and make them attack each other with their technology to kill each other off. And then whoever isn't killed by that will drown out with the flood. All over the planet, we have evidences of an ancient thermonuclear war everywhere. And it's crazy that it's been suppressed so well. But it shows up very simple. Where was the first nuke in modern times set off? Well, it was White Sands, New Mexico, okay, 1945. They put a nuke up on a 150-foot tower, and they detonated it. This was the one we detonated right before we flew the ones over to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We had to test prove it and make sure it worked. It was interesting. When it went off on that tower, the heat of the blast vitrified or glassified the sand beneath, and it made this huge, somewhat circular band of glass, because that's how we get glass, right? In all our windows, we take sand, we put it in a furnace, and if it's refined sand, it'll produce clear glass. But you can add dyes and colors to make it other colors. However, if it's not refined, you know what the natural color of glass will be? Jade green, kind of a turquoise jade green. And that's what happened at White Sands, New Mexico. It produced this little sea of jade green glass, natural glass. We find places like that all over in the areas of the Levant, down in the Sahara. We find them in the Gobi Desert in China and in Mongolia. We find them over in the United States Southwest in places no one has ever set a nuke off in modern times. We also find some and by the way, all that glass area, when you dig it up, I guess this has been a real common thing in Egypt and all over Sudan and even in the Levant area around Israel. When they would find it, the people, even the ancient civilizations, they would take it and they would make jewelry out of it. Because it's beautiful. And if you polish it up, it makes a beautiful gem. It's just glass, something simple. The thing is if you run a Geiger counter over it, it still has a slight radioactivity to it that is more than the surrounding area. So there's something to this. It's natural glass, or in other words, sand. It's been heated to such high temperatures. It's been vitrified or glassified, they call it, and turned into glass. And the only thing we know that can do that is a nuclear explosion. Nothing else can produce that. I mean, otherwise you're going in a blast furnace. You know, we're talking about temperatures hotter than the sun to make this. You know, you can't just put a piece of dynamite out there, it's not gonna do it. You can't just light a fire out there, that's not gonna do it. You've got to have some crazy, crazy high temperatures. The interesting thing is the common thought in science right now says, hey, oh, that's a place where a meteor hit. There's no crater. Oh, it's an airburst. Well, there's no meteorite evidence of any material deposited there. You would find some of those strange rocks, bits and pieces, even sand. It's not. And one of the biggest convincing stories was in, it was, I think, late 80s, early 90s, a housing development was built in India. And they got these new homes built and everybody moves in. And as these people moved in, they start to get sick, ill, all of them. And as they go to the doctor's like, this is radiation poisoning. Where do you work? Well, I don't work over here. Well, where do you live? And the doctors are sending then people in with Geiger counters, and this whole area that all these homes are built on is highly radioactive. Like, oh my gosh, they get everybody out and they realize, oh, what have we done? So they start digging down to figure out what is going on here. And as they dig down 15, 20 feet, which I would tell you, I believe that's flood debris, right? On top, 15, 20 so feet. It depends on where you are on the planet. It gets thicker and thinner in multiple places. But then they found the remains of an ancient city with paved streets, curbs, sidewalks, stucco-like homes that are, the whole city is vitrified. In other words, all of these remnants of stone have literally been turned to glass or ash from some incredible high heat source. And there's a central point of what you and I would call airburst detonation because there's no crater. And then even more creepy is all along the streets everywhere. If you've ever seen the survivors of Pompeii in their death throes clutching each other, that's what you see. You see these skeletons clutching each other, and they've fallen like they've been hit with a blast from their feet to their head. They're all fallen away from the central blast area. And when they started to test the skeletons, they were even highly radioactive than the leftover skeletons of the people that died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this is from pre-flood. So this technology is available. They have a delivery system. They have a way to fly around and move around and crash that to us seem unnatural because we don't understand the physics of it, okay? And I think it wasn't until the turn of the century that Lucifer finally got this idea. We've got to find a way to disrupt what is going to be the greatest evangelical event that occurs. Because remember, he can read the Bible. He's not a fool. He's very ancient. He's very smart. And he knows that there's going to be this event, this taking away, this rapture. When this happens, everybody in the world is going to notice, oh my gosh, the Christians are gone. They're all gone. They were right. And they're going to go on their knees and they're going to profess, please, Lord. They're going to come to Christ. He's got to find a way to stop that. And I think what he did, you can go back into the 60s and 70s, there's many of these New Age textbooks and books written that talk about there's going to come an age of Aquarius, where the humankind is going to take their next step in their evolutionary journey. But there's going to be a group of people here that they're held back by old beliefs, fundamentalist thoughts, very conservative, and they're not ready to take that leap in their evolutionary journey. So we will show up because we were the ones who came and we seeded humankind on Earth millions of years ago. So we'll come back when you're ready, and we will take those people aboard our ships. We'll beam them all up aboard our ships. We'll take them back to our planet and we'll re-educate them. And then we'll bring them back at a later date. This story is being pushed and pushed many, many years ago, hundreds of years ago almost. But we saw it in our modern civilization, starting at the turn of the century, when we started to see books, movies, stories talking about UFOs, talking about men from Mars, men on the moon, spaceships, rockets that are capable of traveling outside our planet. And at that point, I think, again, you're having to get it into the vernacular of the people so they understand when it shows up, they're ready for it. It's not like, boom, it just happened, and oh my goodness, what are these guys? Where'd they come from? What's going on? No, you've been watching, how many movies have you guys watched over the years with aliens? Come on, think about it. I mean, the whole Marvel universe is nothing but aliens, okay? And then you're gonna have people exposed to this deception that's gonna come. And I think, if you had to put it on a timeline, I think when the day comes and the trumpet blows and we go up, they come down that day, if not within minutes of that happening. So they can be here, they can explain what happened so that this can be spread throughout the planet. No, it's not the rapture, the Christians weren't right. They were wrong, actually. They're all been beamed aboard our ships. We've taken them back to our planet in some other nebula somewhere. And then we're going to bring them back once we've re-educated and got them thinking properly so that they can be a part of society again. And I think at that point, there's going to be a gentleman, whether he steps out of the ship or he's already here, and he's going to come on the scene, and you guys all know who that will be, right? That's going to be our Antichrist that shows up at that point. But that, I think what we're looking at is the setup to that right now. And so you got another set of DVD. You ready for it? Make sure this is out of the way.
It's probably the toughest area to research that I'm aware of.
I suspect that they are going to try to represent themselves as our benefactors.
They're still masquerading as the saviors of humanity here from some other star system. Is a lie.
When looking at the UFO phenomenon, we have to remember the skeptics have to be right every time, but the believers only need to be right once.
This is the coming great deception.
This is ultra-dimensional, extra-dimensional, and quite possibly what the Bible describes as angels and demons.
These extraterrestrial vehicles are beginning to take a more hostile posture and are beginning to engage our military assets.
We're going to have official disclosure of the UFO alien presence. This is not fiction. It's coming.
talk publicly about an event after it happens, you're in competition with every other opinionated voice on the matter. But if you talk about an event before it happens, there's far less competition. In December of 2017, the New York Times ran a story officially confirming, for the first time ever, government research into UFOs through a secret Pentagon project called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP. Not only was the existence of UFOs, now called UAPs, confirmed, but so also was the fact that the government has no idea what these objects are, only that they're in our airspace and are probably beyond anything human beings could manufacture.
I'm holding in my hands the Office of the Director of National Intelligence highly anticipated report, Preliminary Assessment Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, which had everybody highly anticipating what that report might say. I do think there's some very interesting things that came out of this that are historic in the sense that our intelligence departments for the US government are now admitting that the 147 cases of UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon, or more commonly known as UFOs, that have been witnessed by American jet pilots and military personnel on radar, sonar, that these devices are actually real. Now, what's interesting is that's the first time I know that the government has admitted that the phenomenon, commonly known as UFO, is real. It's not a figment of people's imaginations, and in most cases, it's not swamp gas or some of the other kind of stuff that Project Blue Book and the Condon Report years ago did, which has always been thought of as a kind of cover-up for the UFO phenomenon. Now, our government is telling us, yes, it's real, but we do not know what it is. In fact, they're saying at this point, they can't even determine how this technology could operate. It breaks everything we know about physics, about aeronautics, and most of the lawmakers, congressmen that have viewed the full report, which the public has not been allowed to see, that also includes top secret information, are admitting that they highly doubt that this is China or Russia or somebody else that have somehow came into extraordinary, beyond physics capability of air flight. So what is it? Well, they are literally officially saying it's unexplained, and for the time being, unexplainable.
While this was a shock to those who are only vaguely interested in the topic, it didn't come as a surprise to others. There have actually been a number of individuals throughout the years expecting this exact event, the day we would begin to receive official government disclosure of UFOs. I remember as a child, the topic of UFOs and extraterrestrial life wasn't really discussed. I grew up in a Christian family, Baptist church, and the generally accepted view of UFOs in that community at that time was that these are just demonic, and that was about the extent of it. Growing up, I still held on to my curiosity, and years later I began hearing of Christian pastors, authors, and speakers that were discussing the UFO phenomenon more in depth. This eventually led me to Dr. Thomas Horn and his extremely influential book with Chris Putnam, Exo Vaticana, which deals with the UFO topic from a unique Christian perspective. A short while after that, I actually had the opportunity to work with Tom Horn at Skywatch TV and Defender Publishing. Throughout that time and continuing on into today, I've had the chance to personally ask experts in the field, both secular and Christian, what their opinion of the UFO phenomenon was. Now, this is just anecdotal, but when the topic of official disclosure came up, typically the secular experts would say something like, we gotta push for it, but we don't know when it's going to happen. But the Christian ones, while there wasn't as much of an emphasis on putting pressure on the government for it, would typically say disclosure is going to happen and it's going to be very, very soon. We actually have some taped footage of some of these experts predicting this day of disclosure from around a decade ago. In fact, as far as I know today, the footage from these tapes contains the last surviving interviews from Chuck Missler, Noah Hutchings, and Chris Putnam, who have since passed away, but were all very well known on the Christian side of the UFO discussion years ago. Throughout the years before and after the huge success of Exo Vaticana, Tom Horn and his son Joe were planning to produce a documentary dealing with the UFO question.
All right, so it's a very simple question. Okay, what are UFOs?
They recorded all the interviews, but throughout the decade between then and now, new projects and developments in the world that required immediate focus kept coming up, as the UFO topic kind of seemed to die down a little. We always figured that we would end up using those tapes someday, but wanted to wait until the time was right. So here we are now, after the official beginning of disclosure, and it is absolutely the right time. As soon as I got the green light for this documentary, I began going through hours upon hours of footage and interviews from all those tapes. And on top of that, I wanted to conduct interviews with some of the same people, now a decade later, plus some new guests to get to the bottom of what's really happening with UFO disclosure, where it all started, and where it's headed in the future. To do this right, we really have to start at the beginning of this whole investigation, with Tom Horn and Chris Putnam traveling to Mount Graham to ask Vatican officials about their enormous infrared camera named Lucifer.
There's more. This is a whole nother series.
Over the last several months, there's something unexplainable appearing in the night, from the skies over Missouri to above the Pacific Ocean.
The report documents 11 instances in which pilots reported near misses with a UAP.
For the first time in more than 50 years, Congress held a hearing on unidentified flying objects.
So no bombshell evidence or any real answers today. There were at least 18 cases where they had data from multiple sensors showing objects that moved in ways that could not be explained.
What was once science fiction is now science fact.
For years, pilots and military personnel were afraid to tell others what they saw.
When it comes to the UFO phenomenon, there is a completely different agenda being promoted to the public by government than that which has actually been employed. The real agenda has been built on years of silence, half-truths, and lies. While the world is enticed with what many people believe to be imminent disclosure, vassal states, to include the Vatican, have already ceded their power and freedom to these approaching alien gods and are preparing for their return. However, far from bearing good gifts for mankind, their arrival will bring destruction to a world that is already teetering on the brink.
Based upon their established history and documents recovered through the Freedom of Information Act, we know that the CIA and the military-industrial complex as a whole has purposely misled the public when it comes to UFOs. They have a track record of half-truths, outright lies, and cover-ups. And we've seen it time and time again through the decades, over and over and over.
In his usual unconventional and candid way, the late George Carlin once echoed the thoughts of the average person where UFOs are concerned. To my way of thinking, there is every bit as much evidence for the existence of UFOs as there is for the existence of God. He also said, at least in the case of UFOs, there have been countless taped and filmed, and, by the way, unexplained sightings from all over the world, along with documented radar evidence seen by experienced military and civilian radar operators. To Carlin's point, there are almost as many people who believe in UFOs compared to those who believe in God. 81% versus 65%.
We will now turn to the business of this hearing. More than 50 years ago, the U.S. government ended Project Blue Book, an effort to catalog and understand the sightings of objects in the air that could not otherwise be explained.
At the recent congressional hearings on UFOs, there appeared to be a disconnect between the reality of what is truly going on in our skies versus 80 years of government cover-ups and outright lying to the public. Many people interviewed said that the televised hearing felt forced.
Reports of sightings are frequent and continuing.
And it appeared that Congress only held the proceedings to appease the populace. If Carlin was still alive, he would have agreed. As he said, real evidence of UFOs have been obvious for years. Congressman Tim Burchett from Tennessee appeared on News Nation in defense of those same views.
Does the Pentagon know more than they're saying?
100%. We need to start addressing it, because if these, whatever they are, have control of the air like that, it's a national defense issue for us. I think there's an arrogance in government at that level. It's a bogus cover-up. It doesn't fit, and it's about power and it's about control. We're asking the Pentagon to investigate something that they covered up.
This is the denial letter for information that the congressman was referring to in response to the Freedom of Information Act request. In it, the military and our own government appears to be slamming the lid on any further release of information regarding UFOs. In writing, the Deputy Director from the Freedom of Information Act office, Gary Kaysen, said, the UAP task force has responded back to the DNS 36 request and stated that the requested videos contain sensitive information pertaining to unidentified aerial phenomena and are classified and are exempt from disclosure in their entirety under exemption and in accordance with executive order. The release of this information will harm national security, as it may provide adversaries valuable information regarding Department of Defense and Navy operations, vulnerabilities, and/or capabilities. No portions of the video can be segregated for release. And how exactly could this information harm national security?
I think we're probably reverse engineering some of it because the enormous amounts of it that are in military installations or in reserved areas. And it's so compartmentalized. A lot of people that are probably working on it don't even know they're working on it.
According to at least one of our political leaders, our military may have reversed engineered aircraft whose origins are, according to Congressman Tim Burchett, out of this world. Will the military and the government eventually come clean on the whole UFO phenomenon? Probably not. And if we are to ever hear the truth about this issue, it may likely fall to the aliens to disclose themselves. And so, we wait.
October of 2017, in Seattle, Washington, a man named Lou Elizondo walked out onto a stage and made a startling announcement. We, the public, have been told by our Pentagon, by our government, that it has no interest in UFOs, that it stopped studying UFOs in 1969 with the end of Project Blue Book. We don't care. It's not a matter of national security. We're not interested. We don't take reports anymore. Well, of course, they've been lying. And we have all known they've been lying. But until last October, we didn't have someone who had worked for the program who came forward and said it. And Lou Elizondo was in charge of something called ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And that program is ongoing today. I don't know what it's called, but I'm telling you right now, it is underway, it's active, it's collecting information from various Pentagon organizations and departments and delivering that information to Congress. Officially, the Pentagon says ATIP is ended. They're lying about that. They've said that Lou Elizondo didn't work on it. They've lied about that. They've said that ATIP wasn't about flying saucers, and they've lied about that.
Many mankind is being prepared for the biggest deception in human history, with the help and complicitness of our own governments and that of the institutionalized Catholic Church. We will soon see the world's full surrender to the alien agenda. These returning gods will be hailed as kings and saviors. Yet in reality, we've been warned about their true fallen identities and motives throughout Scripture. Those warnings will fall on deaf ears as the world welcomes them with open arms. And it will be this embracing of these fallen beings that will accelerate the end of time. Because if those days were not cut short, there would be no flesh left alive.
Hopefully you guys have seen some of this stuff before, had an idea. We've got some really good Christian media groups that are putting the information together now in a way that makes it very entertaining. It's easy to sit and watch. It's not like it was 20 years ago when it was boring stuff all written in a book. So some of the stuff, though, that we're seeing, we're looking at when did this start and how did we get where we are today? And, you know, if I were to ask that question, I think most of you have heard of Roswell, New Mexico. And the date that was 1947, which is really unique. You know, there's a lot of stuff that happened right after World War II. 1947, you had another incident took place. It was Operation High Jump, where we had a large armada fleet, if you would, of the United States military, and supposed scientists, although there were no actual scientists that went. It was a science journey that no scientists were on board for. And they went down to Antarctica, and they were supposed to spend 9 months down there. And after, let's see, I think I got it written here. They went down in August 1946, and they came back in late February of 1947. So you can do the math. It didn't last 9 months. They literally came back with their tails between their legs. They'd lost several ships, several planes, quite a few men, and the descriptions of the official description doesn't come close to matching things that we got from Admiral Byrd's personal diary and from several other men when they came back that described some crazy stuff happening. Saucer-like vehicles flying around, cutting ships in half with beams of light, blowing everything out of the sky that could go up in the air. And there was nothing that could stop them. It was crazy. Anyway, at the same time that's going on, you have this incident in Roswell, New Mexico. Supposedly, and you think about this is where I always laugh at this, aliens who are from another planet who can build interstellar spaceships, and they can fly them all the way here at the speed of light, and then they fly around the desert and they crash the thing into the hill. Something doesn't add up, right? You're thinking, you can do all that, but you can't navigate the desert. And it's the desert out there in New Mexico. There's not even a tree. But apparently they crashed right there. Interesting. But if it was some kind of fallen angel technology, Nephilim flying the thing, or maybe you'd even call it a meat suit, something that can be used, that is all they can create now with the DNA manipulation that they have, and they're flying it, and then somehow they have their own accent because they don't even know 100% what they're doing inside of it. I can understand that a little bit better. But at the same time, you got to hide it. You got to make sure, it's a weather balloon. It's not really a crashed UFO. It's a weather balloon, right? Even though the guys that discovered it were the guys that put up weather balloons every day of the week. They know everything about weather balloons. And there's no way they're going to come and say, this is a crashed alien ship with bodies and material that when you bend it back, it bends into like tinfoil, and if you garbage it up, it would instantly pop back into its original shape, all by itself. Yeah, they wouldn't mistake that for a weather balloon that every day of the week they send up. Yeah, they're smart enough to know that. At the same time that's going on, we also have another interesting thing regarding biblical prophecy. If you're a Bible student, you know something had to happen here on earth before we could take that step that the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel talks about. You know, the times of the end of the age can't occur until who is in their homeland?
Israel.
Israel. So this whole phenomenon, it's building, but it's been held on hold until when?
1948.
1948, May 14th. And all of a sudden, now we can start to push the agenda further. We can start to prepare with media. We can start to prepare with books and more of these fantastic stories to get people ready for what's eventually going to happen. And they know that that has to happen first. But again, remember, they don't know the date when the Lord's return is, but they have to have all their pieces have to be arranged on that chessboard so they can be ready when it does. All right? So imagine they're always having to have these craft flying around all the time that they can have ready to come down the second we're taken up. And they don't know when that's going to be, just like we don't know when that's going to be, right? But they have to be ready for it, because otherwise they miss out on their opportunity to completely deny what has actually happened, all right? That's that big deception, the big lie. And the problem is we have a society that is just racing towards this, literally wanting to see what these beings are. Some of the books are fantastic, and it's like, yeah, guys, it's entertainment, but on the reality side, this is deception of the worst kind. And they want to completely deceive this world. The interesting thing, too, if you actually get into some of the things going on alongside this, oh boy, do the hand, when you say that you're showing your hand by playing the cards. You guys heard of crop circles? So this phenomenon of crop circles is, you would say it's fairly recent, right? I mean, it's only been since like the 50s and 60s, and it started in Great Britain, in the fields in Great Britain. But we actually have written, because they didn't have photographs back then, in the 16 and 1700s of these types of things happening. And the people that were there, they had all kinds of crazy names for them: demon circles, devils mowing devils, because they believed that no man could make such a perfect shape out in a field without leaving tracks or evidence of you being there. And in the 1700s, that's a mowing devil. And they were all over the place. And what it was is something is coming down and it's shaping the grass in the fields a certain way, so that someone that's high in the air could actually tell what it is, because you can't tell what most of those things are from the ground. When you're in the grass, you see some of the corn stalks, or maybe it's the wheat laid down. You have no idea what these pictures are. I have a whole series on that, because that is fantastic. And yes, there was deception involved, because we had a group of men in Great Britain that actually came forward and said, joke's on us, we've been doing it. We take these planks and this rope and we walk around and we crush it like this and we make the shapes. Well, we watched them do it. Yeah, they did several. Problem was theirs were always not quite straight, not quite perfect. And there was an actual trail of them coming in and going out. And when they bent over the wheat, it would crease and break the plant stalk. Does that make sense to you? It would kill it. The real ones, it was like the wheat grew sideways. And the nodules where they grow, it's almost like a knuckle on a nodule on a wheat plant. It looked like it had expanded from a heat source, almost like you had some kind of radiation that expanded the moisture in the plant and caused this to happen. Some of the craziest things. In fact, they've even measured higher levels of radiation in many of the fields where this has happened. And the thing that really caught me was, not only did they actually view glowing orbs over some of the fields while it happened, and they got it on film, you can see the wheat lay down as this little orb is flying over it, and the wheat just lays down all at once. There's no way that can happen. Like, I can't do that instantly, right? The other one was, some of these features, and they're fantastic, the shapes are out of this world. They're bigger than football fields. They're massive. They would be there the next year and the year after that. As the wheat would grow back up, it would grow into the pattern again. That's not going to occur with a bunch of goofballs late at night after going to the tavern with a couple of boards and some rope. So this is real. And if you guys haven't seen some of the latest ones, it'll just about go boing off your head, because literally some of the stuff that's showing up just in the last couple of years have been information regarding who they are and what they plan on doing. And they're literally telling us they're aliens, and this is their way of communicating. They're trying to spread the agenda. And you're just sitting here going, oh, guys, you are not aliens at all. Yeah, you are completely evil. You're completely horrid. But that's just one little piece. Another piece, and you guys have all probably heard and watched movies of abductions. And the abduction phenomenon is interesting. It actually, I love Chuck Missler's explanation of the abduction phenomenon, the alien abduction phenomenon. Because whenever people are taken, it's interesting, they don't go out a door, they'll go right through a wall, right through a window. There's some kind of technology that they have that allows them to move through solid surfaces. Well, we don't have that, but obviously they do. The other thing is, once they get them inside, they all report almost all identical things that happen to them. They're being probed, and it's usually their sexual genitalia that are disturbed, and that are there. If it's men, the sperm is taken. If it's women, the eggs are taken. And then many women report then being pregnant once they come back out of this abduction. Then they'll go maybe first or second trimester, and then they get abducted again, and the baby's gone. There are hundreds of cases of women who have actually gone and had sonograms taken of the baby, and they've had checkup after checkup after checkup, and here they are 6 months along, 5-6 months along, and all of a sudden they get taken again, and there's no more baby. The baby's gone. And when I first heard this, it freaked me out. I was like, what's going on? But Chuck has this thing that's kind of brilliant. He looks through it going, wait a minute, guys, come on. Go back to the Bible. How many angels fell with Lucifer? 1/3. Well, he's at a numbers disadvantage. He's making an army. He's got to find a way to make more beings to fight, because he still thinks there's a chance he can fight against the creator of the universe. And he's just looking at the numbers here. You know, if he has only 1/3 and there's 2/3 up there, he's got to find a way to match that other third so he at least has a standing chance. And I think what he's doing is he's taking DNA, he is making an army, some kind of force, using the hybridation processes that they've come up with, plus what the technology we already see in our day and age. We know certain things are capable. And if you're mixing that with the level that they already have, that they brought down from the heavenly realms, you can see where they're building bodies. And that's probably what we're seeing from, you know, you look at the gray alien that you've been exposed to for, you know, gosh, the last 3 or 4 decades. And is that what they have been able to produce, is this creature that they can inhabit, that then is what you call a Nephilim. That is today's version, not the giants of past, where they had the perfect ability and the perfect conditions, the atmosphere. And there's a change somehow in our DNA where they can't do the exact same thing they did before. That was taken away. That was denied them, so that would never happen again. And that makes sense. God doesn't want to destroy the earth a second time after the flood. He'll just destroy it at the very end, when we know it'll be destroyed by fire. With all we've just covered, I wanted to ask if there's any questions over anything that we've kind of gone over. You guys?
2 days ago, Chuck Schumer said he wants, not the Pentagon or something, that he release a whole bunch of UFO information. So I think it's funny, because since we put this on, there's been a whole bunch of new information. Do you know about Chuck Schumer?
Yeah, so it's been ramping up like crazy. In fact, the funny part to this, Jay, I wasn't going to go here, but you asked me to go here. And from the time you said that, there hasn't been a single day that there hasn't been something in the news somewhere in the world, maybe not always in the United States, but I will say this, almost every other day it's in the United States. It's been fantastic. Did you guys hear, I think, was it you, the Senator Tim Benn, that sent me the little thing about Spokane has the highest sightings in the nation of UFOs? Yeah, the Spokane area, off the charts. And the next one is, they talk about Boise, Idaho, and then Seattle, Tacoma, Portland. This whole area in the Northwest is one of the hot spots for these things, okay? However, it's interesting. A couple of these guys that were up on the films I showed you, one of the guys that I point out, I really enjoy, Eli Marzulli. One of the things he will tell you, he goes, if you ever see something like this floating in the sky, rebuke it first in the name of Jesus Christ. And then we'll ask questions later. See what happens. Because he's done it and watched the thing instantly vanish or fly away or disappear or be gone, because the power of Christ came up against it and it knew what it was. And I think that's a lot of the reasons why a lot of actual born-again Christians have never been exposed, seen, or been around these things. Because the other thing in the UFO abduction phenomena, LA's been doing this for over 3 decades. And he's had people come to him that everybody thinks are crazy because they've been abducted multiple times and they don't know how to make it stop, and it's destroying their lives. They lost their job, lost their family, lost everything. And LA's been able to convert several of them to Jesus. And every one of them will tell you the same thing. The next time it happened, all I had to do is cry out the name of Jesus. It stopped instantly. Yeah. And the crazy part to that adds up with our reports that came back from the British, the French, and the Americans when we did the investigations in the 50s and 60s on these phenomena, because we want to know what it was. Every team came back with the same thing. Well, we don't understand the technology, but they sure don't act like they're from another planet. They don't act like beings from outside of our solar system. What they do act like is more like the evil spirits that we read about in biblical text. They act much more like demons and fallen angels, evil things, because they don't have anything good, that you could never trust them. And these are reports coming back from multiple agencies back in the 50s and 60s on what this phenomenon truly was. Most of that got put down and hidden so the public would never know. And what I think was, at the time, you had just enough Luciferians throughout the world in power. They want to keep it alive, always keep it alive, but never truly let you know what it is. Because they got to have that. You know, it's kind of like their ace up their sleeve. I got to have it in my pocket, ready to go, pull it out the second the rapture hits so we can explain the rapture away. And this is their big end time play. So getting out in front of this a little bit helps, I think, us as Christians be prepared so that when people want to ask us these questions, well, okay, so you're a Bible-believing Christian. What do you think about UFOs and aliens? When did God create aliens? I don't see aliens in Genesis. Well, if you ever read Genesis 6, I have multiple friends that I've had the opportunity to spend hours witnessing to, because I've been able to explain to them that in the Genesis 6 scenario, that gives us the presence of these fallen angels who produced a race of Nephilim, giants, Gibberim, the mighty men of old, the mythical men that we tell stories about, and then a technology that came with it that is above and beyond our own technology, that again would look like alien technology, magic even. And I think that gives us the opportunity then to have that answer and explain things away. So anyway, any other questions? Yes.
So a baby was born to a friend of mine, and the family that she married into, they all have 6 digits.
So that is not a single precursor to Nephilim. There's a name for that. I can't remember what it's called, but polydactyl, there you go, polydactyl. And that is another occurrence and a mutation. But what they did find in a majority, almost all of the ancient giants, especially before the flood and right after the flood, was 6 fingers and 6 toes. What most of the people we find are either 1 hand, 6 fingers, or 2 hands, 6 fingers, but they usually don't have 6 toes to go along with it. So that's, I don't know if that's your experience with that family. Yeah. The other thing too, okay, if you want to go there, the other thing too they found in the giants that they discovered, have you ever heard of Lovelock Cave in California? Back in the, it was the 1800s, there was a news report and they talked about these men that were in like the late 1800s looking for fertilizer for gardens. And in this Lovelock Cave in California, there was a huge population of bats that would fly out of the cave. You know, every night it would look like just liquid black coming out of there. Well, when they would come back in and they spent the day there, they produced guano. You know what bat guano is? Well, it's actually an amazing fertilizer. So these men were going in and digging out by the ton bat guano, filling their wagons and taking it back in town, selling it for good money. So it was a good business, and they did this for decades until they finally got down to the bottom of the pile. And they found giant bones, huge bones, 10, 12, 15-foot bones, skulls that were as big as that table almost that he's sitting at. And then when they investigated further and they found local Indians that said, oh yes, those are the remnants of the giants that lived here, and our braves and warriors we banded together with over 3,000 Indians to fight off the last remnant of these giants that would come and raid and kill their people. And they chased them into this massive cave, and then they filled it full of brush and trees, and they lit it on fire, and it burned for 2 weeks, and it killed them all. It asphyxiated them. And the bones were buried underneath all the black guano over the next several hundred years. And that was their story. And it was interesting because one of the things they found, 6 fingers, 6 toes on the skeletal remains, and double rows of teeth, and then very large, oversized, enormous skulls. And the bodies were huge. And they're not just tall and skinny. That's the other thing. When they looked at these were really wide. You know, when I'm kind of tall, I'm 6'4", but I'm only like 34 inches or 36 inches at my shoulders. I'm not that wide, I'm not that big. Some of these guys were half as wide as they were tall in their skeletal structures. You know, when we read in the Bible, Deuteronomy 3:11, you read of Og of Bashan. Read how big he was. That dude was huge. It says he was so big that his bedstead was in Rabath, and it was the only bed that could hold him. It was an iron bedstead. The guy probably weighed 1,500, 1,600 pounds. You couldn't put him in a wood bed, he'd just crush it. So it had to be made out of iron. It talks about how tall and wide he is. He is half as wide as he is tall. I'm not 3.5 feet wide. I mean, that would be like clear out to here, right? So these guys were much different in their genetics even than we are. And so that was something that was totally noticeable when you looked at skeletal structures. Any other questions?
No. Well, thanks heaps. Appreciate Darin.
Yeah.
Lots of interesting stuff. I remember as a kid, my parents wouldn't let me watch Star Trek. And as a young adult, I got involved in the New Age movement, you know, not involved in it like I was a convert to New Age, but in exploring it. And what Star Trek Next Generations that were popular in the 80s and 90s were just pushing a New Age message. And I went and watched the old Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock ones, and they were pushing a New Age message every episode. Mm-hmm. And I thought it can't be a coincidence. It's not like they went to get like a biblical message, one sound message. It was strangely always pushing this New Age doctrine. And I thought, okay, I bet you the end times, the Antichrist, and all that's going to be the guys of aliens. So this has been good. Father, thank you for your word. Help us to discern the times and the seasons. Help us to know your word and understand. In Jesus' name, amen.